This episode of Bullet Heaven was made using Pack-a-Punch SCART cables from retrogamingcables.co.uk and the OSSC from Video Game Perfection. We all know that the market for retro games is kind of getting a little ridiculous, and no other genre better exemplifies this than the humble shoot-'em-up. Over the years, a select few have been quite a bit pricier than most, and they take a special amount of effort and planning to acquire. This is one such game, and we've wanted to properly cover it since the very beginning. Gaia Seed, Project Seed Trap is a Yoko horizontal shooting game developed and published by Techno Soleil in 1996. Unlike many of the shooters that would be released to the PlayStation, it was not ported over from an arcade version, and it was produced in fairly small numbers. Thankfully, it would later be released as a digital download on the PlayStation Network Store, first in Japan in 2009, then worldwide by Monkey Paw Games in 2010. The PSN version can be played on PlayStation 3, PSP, and Vita, but we're taking a look at Gaia Seed in its native form on an original NTSC-J PlayStation. So, what makes Gaia Seed tick? Let's take a closer look. Gaia Seed is a simple enough game to get the hang of. Players move their ship with 8-way control as is typically expected of a game of this type. The player's speed is very well balanced, allowing for players to move away from hazards while positioning themselves for optimal attack with relative ease. The cross and square buttons fire the player's main shots. Firepower upgrades are left behind from green versions of the player's ship and can be picked up to power the player's main shots to a maximum level of 4. These pickups will also cycle between red and blue, with red representing the default needle shots and blue switching out the default weapon to the more powerful but much more narrow laser. Players can switch between these weapons with additional pickups, but they will not increase in level if the switch is made. Only pickups of the same type in use will boost their respective firepower. If the player dies, their weapon power will also be reduced. Other pickups also exist, which grant the player secondary fire to enhance their offensive capabilities. Green pickups will engage the cutter-style Cypher web from the rear of the craft, while yellow launches a pair of exploding energy blaster shots. These sub-weapons do not increase in power as more are collected, but they can be switched in the same manner as the player's primary fire. If players are in a jam, or if they want to clear the screen of enemies and static emplacements in a hurry, they can press the circle or triangle buttons to activate the Intense Fire ability. The Intense Fire changes according to which weapon is in play at the time that it's being used. When needles are equipped, Intense Fire will launch homing orbs at the nearest target, but when lasers are in use, a huge forward-firing beam will lay waste to anything it touches. Both are very good in taking out bosses in a pretty expeditious way. Best of all, Intense Fire can be used indefinitely, but only after it recharges, indicated by the red gauge in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Unlike a lot of Japanese-style arcade shooters, Gaia Seed features both a shield bar and a life stock, allowing players to get hit a few times before finally dying. Not only can the shield withstand a decent amount of punishment, it will also recharge, giving players a very flexible layer of defense. The shield gauge is represented by the blue gauge in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. However, there's also another contrast here to other games of its type. There is no extend score in Gaia Seed, meaning that players have only 2 ships in reserve if they are blown into a fine space dust. With these features in mind, there are definitely aspects of the game that will make it seem like a very easy mark. Generally speaking, this is a good game for novices with a total of 3 difficulty levels, though practice is cut short after stage 4. On normal, it is still fairly tame, but at least some skill is definitely still required to see the game to the end on hard. Even though it may feel a bit too easy for some players though, we feel that the challenge here still makes for a pretty satisfying playthrough, especially ratcheted up to hard. Of course, even with this seemingly low challenge rating, small, fast shots will often clip the player if they aren't paying close attention, and lives can easily be lost when the screen gets flooded, or if the player is a little careless around some bosses. With no extends, this can often mean a swift end until practice and skill overcome the obstacles players will face. Gaia Seed plays over the course of 7 stages, each with a good variety of opposition and hazards to keep players engaged. One thing we noticed very early on was the general lack of separation between each stage. They just about flow seamlessly into one another with only a tiny whisper of a hint of load time before the action picks up in the next area, and this is pretty impressive. Each stage is also capped off with a timed boss battle which typically has several phases to fight through. Players can also either defeat the boss before time is up or let the clock run down. This can even open up the possibility of a pure pacifist 1LC run for a kind of secret extra challenge, which we're definitely trying. Sporting 3 different endings depending on how players approach the final encounter in Stage 7, there's a good amount of replay to the game as well, and with the added scoring features in Gaia Seed, players looking to achieve a high score can also squeeze even more out of this title. There are a couple of aspects to Gaia Seed scoring that make it a bit more involved than, say, Salamander 2, but not by a huge margin. Enemy destruction goes a decent way to getting a good score here, but like a few shooters we've seen so far, completely taking out specific enemy formations will award the player with a bonus that varies with the types of ships destroyed. Efficient formation destruction therefore becomes a priority with the high score chase, and understanding how all of the enemy types behave will make things a bit easier in this respect. Collecting sub-weapon drops of the same kind in use, as well as main weapon power-up drops of the same type after maximum level is achieved, will also award players with additional bonuses for each one collected. Since many of these are dropped throughout the game, a good amount of extra pointage can be collected fairly easily. As always, no online leaderboards exist in Gaia Seed, but players can save their scores to a PlayStation memory card in an effort to preserve their exploits. An all clear will also display which ending of the 3 the player has achieved. It's all pretty basic, but it works well in the end.
Micro Machine Space Battleship A search of resources Establishment of universal forces Development of industry Pollution Environmental disruption A war Genocide arms.
Not surprisingly, Gaia Seed is a game that relies heavily on its presentation to keep players engaged, and this is something it does very, very well. Primarily, Gaia Seed is a 2D game employing sprites for the player's ship, shots, explosions, and all enemies and bosses. A good amount of sprite rotation and scaling makes things pop in just the right ways. Every now and again, though, a flash of 3D will give the background a sweet amount of depth, while other backgrounds employ crazy animations or incredible detail, like the surface of Jupiter in Stage 2. Simply put, every stage has at least one aspect to it that wowed us in some way or another. Best of all, everything blasts along at a rock-solid rate. It's kind of rare to see a game as busy as Gaia Seed is that doesn't exhibit so much as a whiff of slowdown, especially with the kinds of huge sprites that are used throughout the game. The 2D visuals are one thing, but if it's amazing sound you want, listen no further, because Gaia Seed has the kind of incredible soundtrack that sets the perfect tone for everything happening in the game. Driving techno, operatic voices, serene, sweeping chords, and excellent use of dynamics and range with several tracks building in just the right places, this is a soundtrack that enhances everything it accompanies. It's kind of like Zuntata's work, but with even better flair. Every boss also has its own theme as well, and some of them are simply incredible. But it's not just the music that works for us, the sound effects are great as well. Just to start, the weapon effects and pickup chimes sound satisfying, and many different explosion effects shake things up as different kinds of enemy units explode. Even the intense fire weapons sound great, with a retro bit crush style that gives them an extra layer of personality. Another aspect of the presentation that works well for importers is Gaia Seed's story. Not only is there a decent plot behind the action, it is presented in English with Japanese subtitles. However, the delivery of these lines are very heavily accented and can be very hard to understand. There's a solution to this though. The language can be switched over to Japanese rather than English. While this seems a little counterintuitive, there's an interesting twist. The Japanese subtitles will be replaced with English ones. It's still a little stilted, but it's a great touch that makes Gaia Seed one of the most import-friendly shooters on the platform. Topping it all off, Gaia Seed's menus and options are well laid out, and there's even a soundtrack selection for players to listen to the amazing OST, though these tracks are still listed in Japanese regardless of the language selected. So, how does Gaia Seed Project C-Trap stack up? Let's take a look. Gaia Seed's control is sharp, responsive, and quick without feeling squirrely or rushed. Though it may be a little on the easy side, a lack of extends means Gaia Seed's challenge makes for a satisfying 1cc. With 7 stages and 3 different endings, there's a good amount of game to play here. With some of the coolest 2D visuals we've seen in a PlayStation shooting game, Gaia Seed still manages to truck along at full speed with no slowdown whatsoever. Gaia Seed has one of the very best shooting game soundtracks there is. It gives Untitled a solid run for its money. Though the mechanics in Gaia Seed are basic, there's a lot of subtlety that makes it an amazing game for any player of any skill, not the least of which starts with the accommodating shield and intense fire features. Come for the balanced gameplay, stay for the incredible presentation. If you're going to buy Gaia Seed, physicals on PSX are among the highest priced you'll see on the platform. Instead, head up the PlayStation Network for a $5 copy on PlayStation 3, PSP, or Vita to experience this must-play PlayStation exclusive. When I played this game seriously for the first time live, I was completely blown away by everything that it offered. Simple, intuitive controls, balanced difficulty, and a hyper-stellar presentation. Everything about this game gels together in a way that basically makes this the best shooting game on PlayStation that isn't Einhander. And yes, while its difficulty may be a bit on the easy side, Gaia Seed still gets a 5 out of 5. If you'd rather blow your rent on a single game, Gaia Seed will do the trick, depending on completeness. Otherwise, do yourself a favor and nab the download on the PlayStation Network. Your wallet and landlord will thank you. Now this is the kind of game that makes me glad I stuck with producing this series. I hope to find and play more of these legendary titles in the future, and we're trying to open things up even more by getting a Japanese Mega Drive. Hopefully we can get one in soon to see what Sega's 16-bit console really has to offer.